and I call the clerk.
Government Business Order of the Day number 2, Telecommunications Legislation Amendment Enhancing Consumer Safeguards and Other Measures Bill 2023, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today in support of the Telecommunications Legislation Amendment Enhancing Consumer Safeguards and Other Measures Bill 2023. Reliable internet access is now an expectation and a necessity in 21st century Australia. We're a quarter of the century way in. Wow. Telecommunication access and reliability is vital in much of today's economic, social, cultural and political activity. We've seen in recent years just how important broadband connectivity has become, with hundreds of thousands of people socialising, working and studying online. And that was only heightened during the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course it continues today. The 6-hour Tasmanian Telstra outage in February 2022 and the more recent 14-hour national Optus outage left people unable to connect with loved ones, TV and radio stations inaccessible, and urgent emails unread and unanswered, the day-to-day routines of many coming to a halt. Such outages cost businesses thousands of dollars when payments cannot be taken, or the simplest of tasks are unable to be communicated to co-workers, and it may be seen as a minor hindrance or annoyance to some, but in an emergency, the communication becomes a critical tool to save property, or above all, life. And as the member of a rural and regional electorate, I know this is especially true in the regions. This bill will deliver certainty to consumers and industry alike around access to these critical services. Through changes to 5 key areas of telecommunications regulation, the Statutory Infrastructure Provider, or SIP, regime, this bill will also improve safeguards for Australians when they access broadband and voice services. Schedule 1 to the bill refines the Statutory Infrastructure Provider, the SIP regime, which currently ensures that all people in Australia can access high-speed broadband wherever they live or work. This will bring private networks for new developments under the SIP regime. Such networks are sometimes deployed in lifestyle or retirement villages or in multi-unit buildings and have not previously been subject to SIP obligations. Bringing those sorts of areas under this regime will mean that consumers serviced by private networks will have greater certainty that they can access broadband and voice at appropriate standards. Schedule 2 to the bill would provide powers for the Australian Communications and Media Authority to encourage better compliance with requirements to new installations. This will provide a mechanism for SIPs to be required to pay compensation to customers where they do not meet a standard or a rule. And while there are no detailed standards or rule in place, due to the recent processes to finalise NBN Co's special access undertaking and standard terms, the existence of the mechanism will provide incentives to lift performance. Schedule 3 to the bill provides powers for ACMA to publish the identities of carriers and carriage service providers in its reports on certain customer service issues and to share information more easily with the government. Importantly, this will allow consumers to make purchasing decisions that are better informed and improve competition and service delivery. Schedule 4 to the bill will amend the universal service obligation so the Minister can determine specific universal service areas in Australia. And this will provide flexibility for potential future changes, such as bringing Norfolk Island into the universal service regime. While several legislative steps need to be taken for this to occur, this is a foundational step that may assist in the future. Schedule 5 to the bill makes technical amendments to specific aspects of the regulatory framework. This includes important changes to enhance the enforcement of the carrier separation rules in the Telecommunications Act and the Regional Broadband Scheme, which funds NBN Co's fixed wireless and satellite networks. Deputy Speaker, I am particularly pleased to see measures in the bill that will give the telecommunications industry ombudsman a clearer role in resolving disputes about service connections. Under the new laws, the ombudsman will be able to work with customers and providers to resolve problems. My office often assists farmers and others living in the most regional parts of Lyons who have needed additional assistance from telcos to make sure that they can access the phone and internet services they need. And this bill makes it easier for rural and regional Tasmanians to get access to broadband and voice services and empowers the Ombudsman to work with both customers and providers should issues arise during the connection process. Deputy Speaker, at the end of last year, in my role as Chair of the House Standing Committee on Communications and the Arts, I had the opportunity to table the committee's most recent report, Connecting the Country, Mission Critical, the inquiry into co-investment in multi-carrier regional mobile infrastructure. The report goes directly to what I am speaking about today, ensuring that the necessary infrastructure and regulations are in place so all Australians, including regional and rural Australians, can reliably access critical telecommunications services. During the inquiry that informed the report, the committee heard from consumers and industry alike, including state and territory governments, Indigenous communities, primary producers, councils, business chambers, emergency services, health services and community groups. Very complex set of hearings, and we took a lot of evidence. The overwhelming feedback from across the country was clear. Reliable telecommunications services are not a nice to have, but are essential a service as electricity or running water in our everyday lives. The title of the committee's report, Mission Critical, says it all, and I'm proud to be part of a government that recognises this and is committed to delivering improved communications infrastructure, services and resilience for all Australians. And I'd like to thank the Minister for her support through the process, and I think she's doing terrific work in this regard. In my electorate of Lyons, for example, I was recently able to announce funding for new mobile base stations in Sheffield, Tea Tree and Ansons Bay through the Improving Mobile Coverage Round. This funding delivered my election commitment of a $2.25 million investment by the Albanese Labor government to improve mobile phone coverage in these areas. At the end of last year, I met with the Ansons Bay Telecommunications Working Group to discuss the progress of the new mobile phone tower and just how important this project is to members of this isolated northeast community. And for those who may not know Ansons Bay, it's a one road in and one road out community, a beautiful little spot up there in the northeast of Tasmania, very isolated, prone to bushfires, and telecommunications is an absolute must. We're welcome to have you there. Thank you, Member for Nichols. Residents of Lyons have also benefited from the government's mobile black spot program, which has extended and improved mobile coverage in Pyengana, Madonna, Laina, Colebrook, Blackstone Heights, Lachlan and Wilmot, just to name a few. And further, the Albanese government's $480 million investment to upgrade NBN fixed wireless services has meant more than 7,500 residents and businesses across Lyons now have access to uncapped satellite broadband services through NBN Co's Sky Muster Plus product, delivering faster speeds and responding to the demand for more data. Not to mention, Deputy Speaker, the families and businesses in Lyons who already have, and those who will soon be able to, upgrade to a full fibre broadband connection as part of the Albanese government's plan for a better national broadband network. These upgrades are possible thanks to the Albanese government's $2.4 billion investment to expand full fibre access to an additional 1.5 million premises by the end of 2025. I think we're a long way removed, Deputy Speaker, from the words of former Prime Minister Abbott, who I think back then said something like 5 megabytes or something was all we needed in the regions. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's laughable now when we look at the data needs in regions, not just in homes, but also in businesses and on farm, where they are using technology on farm. And the communications requirements are just growing and growing. And it's fair to say that the telecommunications requirements in the bush are just as critical, if not more so, than they are in elements of the city. Deputy Speaker, my constituents in Evandale, Longford, Perth, Scamander, Bridgewater, Campbelltown, New Norfolk, Old Beach and Pontville can now upgrade from the slower, less reliable copper broadband network retained by the former coalition government to affordable, reliable, high-speed fibre broadband with no upfront installation cost. It is investments like these that ensure more of my constituents, more Australians, can take advantage of all the opportunities of the digital global economy. Deputy Speaker, taken together, the measures in this bill will improve access to broadband and voice services for people across Australia, including in the regions. Australians expect to have access to broadband and voice services and to be able to access these services with a minimum of fuss. They expect the infrastructure to be built and the necessary regulations and consumer safeguards to be in place. This bill is key to meeting those expectations, to improving access to critical communications in Australia and to ensuring that certainty for consumers and industry alike as to access and to broadband and voice services. And I commend the bill to the House. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Nichols.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I too rise to speak on the Telecommunications Legislation Amendment Enhancing Consumer Safeguards and Other Measures Bill 2023. And I make the point that the National Broadband Network is critical infrastructure in regional Australia. It connects people, it connects communities and it connects businesses. Now, many people will know that the electorate of Nichols is one of the food bowls, if not the food bowl of Australia, and agriculture is incredibly important to our region and our economy. And the NBN and reliable internet connection has become a critical element of operating modern, productive and profitable agricultural businesses, whether it be the links between agricultural machinery in the field, tractors or headers or other machinery that have internet links to GPS or other outside pieces of technology, whether it be access to the Bureau of Meteorology data, which helps farmers make decisions, or whether it be, as was in a previous occupation I had before coming to this place, using the internet to link together irrigation networks, both irrigation networks on farm, where the internet and internet connections can inform farmers of what's happening in relation to soil moisture levels and water and the status of irrigation events, but also more broadly in networks, and that's a key part of the Goulburn Valley and Goulburn Murray Water's connected system. And that helps with water efficiency in that broadband internet networks can talk to each other and can inform Goulburn Murray Water headquarters as to when to fill channels because irrigators might need to use that water. And by doing that in a more real-time sense, it means we have a lot better water efficiency. So a lot of that great technological work and enhancement of the broadband network that led to that being able to be done happened under the previous coalition government. Also in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of service industries. The criticality of reliable broadband internet connectivity for emergency service workers to communicate with each other and see what's happening both with weather and with emergency events. Now, I just want to, in relation to this particularly, just make special mention of some of the things that are going on in Victoria at the moment. There's some serious bushfire threats, mostly, as I understand it, in the electorates of Mallee and Wannon, and my thoughts are with those people and the members for those two electorates because they're very concerned at the moment about the bushfire bushfires that are happening, but also a lot of people are without power at the moment in Victoria as a result of a failure of the network. But on the ground in those electorates, in Wannon and Mallee particularly, I'm sure that the enhanced internet access is helping the firefighters and the emergency services deal with those problems. Now, when I was campaigning for the election, the 2022 election where I was elected to this place, there was some funding that was committed to enhancing the resilience of some of those broadband networks and the towers. And that has certainly helped in relation to the flooding that has occurred in my electorate, but also in relation to the fires. And that's something that successive governments need to keep doing, how we can not only make sure people have got reliable internet in the good times, but also when we're suffering from some threats. Now, as at the 1st of November 2023, the electorate of Nichols has around 84,000 premises ready to connect to the NBN, with 71% served by one of a number of fixed-line technologies which may include fibre to the basement, fibre to the node, fibre to the curb, hybrid fibre coaxial and fibre to the premises. There are approximately 11,000 premises that are fibre to the node within Nichols that may be able to access fibre to the premises, and an additional 9,700 fibre to the node premises scheduled for an upgrade in the future. And over 6,000 of those were currently under construction. And these upgrades have taken place in some of the smaller areas in my electorate, including Cobram, Echuca, Kyalla, Kyabram, Nagambie, Numurkah, Rochester, which is also Rochester and Seymour, which has suffered from some flooding in recent times, Tatura and Yarrawonga, and an upgrade in Broadford is expected to be completed later in this year. So it's a continuing effort to make sure that the latest technology gets particularly to the regional areas. Now, what this demonstrates is that the NBN is not static infrastructure. It is being improved, expanded to more regional towns, and growing constantly with new development. This bill looks to provide a refresh to a system that was introduced by the coalition government, setting out rules for the connection and supply of internet and voice services. It appears to be largely an uncontroversial bill and it will be supported, but there are some issues that we have uncovered that we want to highlight. Firstly, the bill was promised by the minister to be in the House at the end of 2022. That's 2022, not 2023. And here we are now. Now, if there had been comprehensive industry engagement that wound up satisfying or resolving concerns that had been raised, then you could understand this delay. But as is often the case with the Albanese government, unfortunately, there was no such consultation. But even after this delay, the feedback we've got that the minister didn't listen to many industry concerns and failed to properly engage with them. This bill primarily makes a number of changes to the operation and enforcement of what is known as the Statutory Infrastructure Provider, or the SIP regime. Now, the regime essentially sets rules related to the connection and supply of internet and voice services across Australia, and it was introduced by the coalition government in July 2020 and acts essentially as a universal broadband service guarantee. In the history of telecommunications in Australia, universal service guarantees have played an important part in ensuring that regional and remote Australians, such as the people in my electorate in Nichols, have access to quality services. SIPs are carriers that must provide basic wholesale broadband services in the areas they service. The NBN is the default SIP for the vast majority of Australian premises. But other carriers which have installed network infrastructure to connect premises in areas such as new real estate developments, shopping centres or apartments may also be deemed to be SIPs. And there are 32 registered SIPs in Australia covering areas large and small. The SIPs have obligations under the Telecommunications Act 1997 to connect premises in their service areas to their networks. These obligations include ensuring wholesale services are made available to retailers to provide connections for consumers, including setting minimum broadband speeds. In February 2021, the then Minister for Communications announced plans to engage industry stakeholders on new standards, rules and benchmarks for SIP networks. This government continued that process, and in late August 2022, the Minister for Communications announced a new round of public consultation on the laws and invited submissions on a draft bill. The submissions were to close after a relatively short period in late September 2022, and the bill was supposed to be before the Parliament by the end of 2022. But the bill was finally introduced into the House in the very last sitting week of 2023. Maybe the government were a bit distracted during 2023, I'm not sure. So a year late, here we are. Now, the explanatory memorandum makes it clear that while there was general support for the provisions of the draft bill, concerns raised during the consultation process resulted in amendments and further consultation on changes to the draft bill. And stakeholders, and some in my electorate, may have felt that they have been ignored and their concerns about the disclosure provisions haven't been listened to properly. But the Coalition generally supports this bill because it provides a range of technical updates to tweak the system which the Coalition introduced. And such tweaks, of course, are normal and expected in such a fast-changing telecommunications environment where technology is evolving at a very fast pace. But as explained earlier, digital connectivity and new technologies are very important, but especially in regional Australia. And this Parliament has a responsibility, and the Coalition did it, and I'm pleased that this government is continuing on with that work to make sure that digital connectivity is available to all, not just the easy stuff, which is so often the way, that the easy stuff where the big populations are and you need less assets for a higher density of people gets done, and then where there's low density of populations, that sort of gets pushed out or doesn't happen at all. So the Coalition will be watching carefully to see what the Senate inquiry comes up with. We've reserved our right to consider amendments recommended by that committee, but we're broadly supportive of the government and encourage the government to continue to be committed to providing the latest technology and broadband access to those in regional Australia. And people in metropolitan areas benefit from that, even though they may not know it. People sitting in some of the metropolitan seats in Melbourne and Sydney, yes, they're interested in what their broadband speeds are in their own houses or in their own businesses. But as so often, and we in the National Party are here to try and explain that and try and advocate for that across this Parliament, what happens in regional Australia affects you in the region, in the metropolitan areas, because so much of our resources, whether they be agricultural, mining, or across a range of other industries, depend on the viability and productivity of regional Australia. So it's important that all legislation looks out to the regions as well as the metropolitan areas. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Riverina.
Oh, I'm truly grateful that we've been joined by the Minister for Communications. And at the outset, I'm going to be very bipartisan and give the Minister some kudos. Her first visit as the Minister, as I understand, was to the Riverina electorate. And we met with Peter, Megan, Todd and Lily McCartan at Narradin. Now, the McCartans operate a large mixed farming enterprise. They recently upgraded at the time they'd recently upgraded their internet through NBN Australia's Sky Muster Plus satellite service, and the Minister was good enough to not only go and visit them at their farm, but also, as I understand, follow up with them and with the services that were being provided to that district, and that's important. That's what a good minister does. At the time as well, the Minister looked at the new solar farm on the Newell Highway just outside West Wyalong in Blantyre, and I can happily report to the Minister that that is very much progressing nicely. And each time I travel along the Newell Highway between West Wyalong and Forbes, indeed I look at that project and reflect back to that day, and again, it's what can be done when ministers look to, as the member for Nichols has just said, regional Australia. And I joined the parliament with the member for Greenway back in 2010. I believe we've got a very good relationship, good working relationship, and that's important. And as the member for Nichols pointed out, the government should look at every piece of policy through the lens of how this is going to affect regional Australia, because it's regional Australia where the action is. And I appreciate, Acting Speaker, you're from this fine centre of Canberra. Canberra could not operate without what happens in regional Australia. It just could not, and we saw that writ large in COVID. During COVID, those very dark days, it was regional Australia that led the way, that led the economy through providing the food, through providing the resources that kept food on the table and the balance of payments as what they should be. And that is why communications are also so vital, because it's back when my father was farming, if they needed to sell grain or stock, they had to get off their tractor, get off their farm implement, get in the ute, drive back to the house, get on the landline and hope that they coincided with the time that the seller or the buyer was available. No, they can do it on their tractors now. They can do it and keep that tractor, that header, that harvester, that scarifier, whatever the case might be, still operating. They can do it via telecommunications, and farming is very much in the digital world. Indeed, the farm equipment is operating with GPS technology, so that it's not back in the day when a young Michael McCormack was sometimes deliberately driving the tractor offline so that he wouldn't have to do it the next day. His exasperated father would tell him to, that was it, you've been banned from doing this until you can get your line straight, and that was always great. But these days, the tractors literally drive themselves, and not a skerrick of property or land is wasted. And that's important, and so that's why it is so important that we get communications right and that we continue that investment. And that's why it's good that the Minister is here. This legislation does make a number of changes to the operation and enforcement of the statutory infrastructure provider regime. I heard the member for Nichols talking about how important communications technology, digital technology is to the irrigation systems and the channels and the operators within his fine electorate, where they grow so much of the food and fibre this nation relies upon. And again, that is of critical importance. The SIP regime in this particular piece of legislation, it was established by the coalition government. It set rules related to the connection and supply of internet and voice services across Australia. The changes in this bill are aimed at providing better access to these services with additional safeguards, and safeguards are so important for consumers, and improve recourse in the event where there is disputation. The bill seeks to provide clarity and certainty for industry and consumers. As the member for Nichols has pointed out, the coalition is broadly supportive of the bill. We do believe it is late. It has been unnecessarily delayed. I get that the Minister has had other things on her mind, and I know how busy she would be. It's a big portfolio. It's a broad portfolio. It would also confirm the ability of the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman to deal with consumer complaints on SIP-related issues. In addition, the bill expands the powers of the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, relating to reports on the performance of telecommunications companies. And that is something that is vital, because the government needs to ensure that companies are kept to what their KPIs. Companies are upfront and transparent and accountable to government. Government makes a big investment in the communication space. I appreciate the telecommunications companies do as well. But the SIP regime, as I say, it was introduced by the coalition government. That was back in July 2020. It essentially acts as a universal broadband service guarantee, and those guarantees are necessary. I know my predecessor in the seat of Riverina Cahill crossed the floor on the on sale of Telstra because she understood just how important it was for those universal service obligations for the biggest telco in the country to ensure that then and in the future, the long-distance future, that they didn't forget the bush. They didn't ignore their responsibilities when it came to providing the sort of services, given the fact that they are, in a sense, relying on government investment, given the fact that they have a lot of customers. Some of those communities don't have a lot of consumers. They don't have a lot of people, but their ability to tap into the economy and provide what is needed is absolutely important. So you get a community. I'll give you just two examples. One is Maringo, near Young, and I can remember the delight that that community, when they were put online, so to speak, with telecommunications towers, how it brought them into the known universe. Such they felt so isolated, and I can remember a number of women in that community coming up to me at the launch, and they said how important it was for them to be able to run their little businesses, which were selling to the world, and how it had brought them online. But more importantly, perhaps, for their children, some of whom were in the vital years of schooling. And every year in education is important, but Year 12, of course, is a big year. And Year 11 and 12, when young people are doing their high school certificate, to be able to learn online and to be able to have that access after they go home from school and they're doing their homework, etc., is of critical importance to their futures. And the people of Maringo, particularly the women of Maringo, were so delighted. And then, of course, the other one I do want to mention was Gubaragandra. And there's a fellow there called Tony Karamaleski. And Tony was very concerned about the fact that so many people used that wonderful little escape, I'd call it, on the river there in Tumut, near Tumut, for holidays, for camping, particularly during summer, but also during other seasons as well. And the population swelled to double, if not quadruple, during the warmer months, and there was no telecommunications whatsoever, and it became a safety issue. Not only that, Tony had family members who weren't exactly in the best of health, and he was concerned that one day there would be an incident for either the visitors or indeed closer to home where they would not be able to communicate with emergency authorities. And I well remember Tumut went out of my electorate, but I maintained the advocacy and through the member for Parks, who was then in a regional development role as minister, we were able to get that communications tower for that community. And I can well recall ringing the member for Parks on the day just to prove that the technology worked, and it was rather an amusing conversation. I'm not quite sure the member for Parks realised that the entire audience there was listening. And anyway, I think the transcript is available for those who wish to view it. But it was rather an interesting conversation. I then announced to him that indeed he was talking to the entire opening, and he changed his conversation very quickly. But a good regional development minister who understood exactly what was required in these local communities. So Maringo and Gubaragandra, vital for different reasons. But as I say, this legislation is important. It is broadly supported by the coalition. The bill does look to provide a refresh to a system introduced by us in government, setting out the rules for connection and supply of internet and voice services. I would urge and impress upon the minister, the member for Greenway, for future rounds of mobile phone towers, that the people who are ticking off on that look beyond government electorates. I do think that's important. and I know I appreciate the member for Indi has joined us. The member for Indi's electorate never missed out under a coalition government, even though the seat was no longer in government when we were, in fact, running the show. And in fact, sometimes I was quite jealous of the fact the number of towers that the member for Indi got as opposed to the member for Riverina. But that's another story. But it was based on need. It was based on need. It was based on geography. I'll just ignore the interjections, and no doubt they were excellent applications, not just by the independent member for Indi, who's also a good friend of mine. But look, and I know the member for Wide Bay sits behind me too, and he as much as anybody understands the importance of good communications, not just because of his advocacy for his electorate, but his electorate takes in Noosa. And that's important. The number of visitors who go there each summer is incredible. But as a former police officer, he would well understand the importance of communications, good mobile phone technology in a time of emergency and crisis. This bill is something that the Minister promised would be in the House by the end of 2022. That's 2022. It's now 2024. I get the fact that, as I say, she is busy. I understand the fact that this is largely an uncontroversial bill, but I do impress upon the Minister, and she understands this because she does, not only is she the Communications Minister, but she does communicate with other members, the importance of continuing the investment in regional Australia. And not just regional Australia, not just rural Australia, but remote Australia, because you get those communities, and I know we went through a complete referendum process last year for a voice to Parliament. I tell you what's more important than a voice to Parliament, and that is that those remote communities, in particularly the Northern Territory, Western Australia, I'll throw in South Australia too, and even Western New South Wales and Queensland, why stop there, is getting Aboriginal communities to be able to have a voice on the phone that can be heard because there's technology there, because they can be connected to the outside world. And if ever there was an importance for a voice for those communities, it's through technology. It's through mobile phone technology. The bill is important. The bill is supported. Again, I'm pleased that the Minister has seen fit to come in and listen to the contributions. That's not always done either by government ministers, and I know this Minister has her knowledge across the brief. I appreciate her for that. I appreciate the work that she's doing. Again, so important that regional Australia is at the front and centre of anything to do with communications. Absolutely anything to do with communications, because regional Australia is where the action in the economy is. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Indi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I acknowledge the contribution from the previous speaker. There's a really good reason why there's regional MPs here speaking on this bill. It really matters to us, and I too appreciate having the Minister in the room and the Minister's team to listen to our contribution. Much of what you hear, you will have heard before, but you will continue to hear it until we have solved the problem of telecommunications connectivity right across rural, regional and remote Australia. So I rise to speak on the Enhancing Consumer Safeguards and Other Measures Bill 2023. This bill makes important reforms to the way we regulate internet providers, like the NBN, so the system better meets the needs of a modern Australia. And I welcome the reforms to make the internet more available and more reliable, especially in country Australia. And again, I want to put it on the record that I want to thank the Minister for her work on this. It's critical. Because in regional, rural and remote Australia, the NBN rollout has really been disappointingly slow. If ever there was a case of over-promise and under-deliver from the time that the NBN was announced, it has been a disappointment for rural, regional and remote Australians, and I will continue to advocate until it is as good as it can possibly be. In Indi, towns like Violet Town and across the Strathbogie Shire, many residents rely on fixed wireless and satellite, and those that do have access to the NBN face congestion, slower speeds and dropouts, still to this very day, right now. This bill is a step towards strengthening consumer protections when it comes to internet, because when you pay for a service like the NBN, you expect it to work. This bill will improve consumer safeguards through a series of amendments, including 1. Requiring providers to pay compensation to customers if they contravene a standard, including standards about connecting and supplying internet. 2. Expanding the powers of the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman to resolve complaints about internet connections. 3. Empowering the internet provider regulator, the Australian Communications and Media Authority, to issue notices to developers who do not install functional, fibre-ready facilities in new developments. Because when you move into a new home, you should expect your power and water to be connected, and the same standards should apply to internet. And finally, the bill also empowers the ACMA to publicly identify internet carriers that aren't up to scratch. And this will help give consumers more information on how the NBN and other internet service providers are performing, including which are meeting standards and which are lagging behind. And I am always pro-transparency. I am supporting this bill because all Australians deserve better consumer protections when it comes to the delivery and supply of reliable, adequate internet. People across my electorate of Indi work online, study online, keep in touch with family and friends online. Telehealth has made healthcare more accessible to those of us in the regions, and this is critical. I can't overstate it. While our agricultural communities, our farmers, have come to rely on real-time weather information and other internet-provided technologies, storm tracking, case in point, in the last 24 hours, to protect their livestock, their crops, their very livelihood. We rely on internet connectivity to pay at local stores, and even stalls at farmers' markets may take card more than cash now. They have their little squares, and at times they've had to stand with one leg facing towards the breeze to try and get connectivity. It needs to be reliable. They rely on payment systems operating all the time, not just some of the time. And back at home, it's not just one person online, of course. It's often mum and dad in the lounge room, perhaps watching television or potentially doing office work, and their kids in the bedrooms studying or video calling their friends. We especially need reliable phone and internet in times of emergencies, as other speakers have pointed to, something that people in rural and regional Australia know so deeply. Only yesterday, those terrible storms and bushfires sweeping across Victoria heightened the awareness and the dependency that we have on internet that works. A survey by the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network, ACAN, a fantastic organisation, found that 88% of respondents expect their phone and internet services to work during emergencies like bushfires and floods. Madam Deputy Speaker, in every Australian household, and especially in country areas, we're relying on the internet more than ever. It is an essential service. But with so many households in my electorate relying on dodgy NBN connections or snail-pace ADSL lines still, clearly regional Australia is getting left behind, and we can't allow that to be the case. I hear from constituents whose ADSL lines are flooded at the first sign of rain, meaning their home internet is offline more than it's online. I hear from constituents whose only option, if they want any home internet at all, is to buy expensive aftermarket satellite hardware. I've heard from a constituent whose job was put at risk because they simply can't rely on a consistent connection through the day. In Mansfield, businesses are having to adjust their schedule based on when the internet connection is fast enough to handle video conferences with their clients. In Kinglake, in the south of my electorate, Pam Lawless lives just off the main road, but the NPN Co says it has no plans to connect her to the network. And despite living less than 2 kilometres from the outskirts of metropolitan Melbourne, it's extraordinary really, the best the NBN Co can suggest is that she look into satellite options. She finds it frustrating that despite living and working on the fringes of a major city, she and her neighbours feel like they're being left behind. That's why in 2022 I introduced my Faster Internet for Regional Australia bill. This bill would have required the NBN and internet service providers to do better by regional Australia. My bill would have required internet providers to provide average speeds of 25 megabits per second all day, every day. It would have ensured regional customers aren't waiting a month to get connected when people in the cities get connected in a day. And even where people have an NBN connection, there is no guarantee they'll get what they pay for. Broadband providers often advertise speeds which do not match what the customers actually receive. And the standard of 19 days to provide a new service in regional Australia and up to 3 days to fix a network fault, they're simply too slow to attract businesses to come to regional areas with confidence. It's clear to me that the NBN rollout has not been delivering for regional Australia, and we have to keep on this. We have to make sure that it does. So it's very encouraging to see the government moving on this issue. It truly is. In addition to this bill, I note new industry standards on how telcos manage financial hardship, because so many families are truly doing it tough now, and paying these bills are a real hardship. Ensuring that those who are trying to balance their budget are not disconnected from study, work or just staying in touch with families shows that the government can listen and design fairer processes for people doing it tough, and I congratulate them for that. The School Student Broadband Initiative has also been so valuable in the past few years, and I'm glad to see the government recommit for another 2 years. It's really important. I really thank them for continuing this program. That was started by the Coalition, so credit where credit's due across the board. The program provides families with free NBN access who are otherwise struggling to afford it on their own. And with over 40% of beneficiaries from this program coming from the regions, this is a common sense policy for ensuring that our kids in rural and regional Australia don't miss out on their education. And we've seen horrifying data the last few days indicating that rural and regional kids are behind, and we cannot reinforce that disadvantage by not having access for every single child to this fundamental essential service. Unfortunately, the very need for this program really does show, though, that rural and regional Australia is still missing out on world-class connectivity. Another positive development is the new Special Access Undertaking, or SAU, which was finalised only last year. The SAU expands the powers of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, to oversee and regulate the service standards of NBN across Australia. And this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a really important part of making sure that internet users get fast, reliable and affordable internet. Because when this SAU expires in 2040, it's expected that the NBN Co will make more than $100 billion from consumers. $100 billion, so they need to deliver on the promise. It's only fair that customers are getting what they pay for, which is why the SAU requires NBN Co to consult with consumer advocacy groups to make sure that the standards are actually working. But to make consultation truly work, I'd like to see the government fund a communications consumer organisation to lead engagement with NBN Co and ensure that the interests of all Australia and all Australians, including and especially those in the regions, are really well represented. The SAU also means that the ACCC can now oversee and regulate the NBN's minimum service performance benchmarks. For anyone listening at home, it's really acronym city here. I apologise for that. There needs to be a glossary of terms at the end of this speech. But it does underscore that this is a complex area of public policy, but a critical area of public policy. It is really important that these minimum service standards improve, because right now they're just not good enough. For people living in regional, rural and remote Australia especially, internet connectivity continues to be a daily challenge. It really does. So I will continue to advocate, the Minister knows that, I will continue to advocate for a better NBN for the regions, whether that be through mechanisms like the Special Access Undertaking from NBN Co, the Universal Service Obligation, the guarantee that a person will receive phone service, that's under review right now. I'll continue to work with local councils, and I'll continue to work with the Indi Telecommunications Advisory Group, or ITAG, which the member for Riverina was just referring to, the extraordinary success that Indi has had in being funded for mobile telecommunications towers. Well, that isn't an accident. That is a very deliberate, collaborative approach across my electorate, 9 local governments and me working together to put in top quality applications into government funds and to do everything we can as a community to identify where there are problems and work with government, whoever's in government, to try and get them fixed. So I'm very, very proud that through the ITAG group we were able to secure funding for key NBN infrastructure just a couple of months ago, such as more than $2 million actually announced last year to establish fibre to the premises NBN in the tiny little alpine village of Harrietville as part of the regional connectivity program. Those people are absolutely delighted. They've waited a long time. I urge the government to continue funding this program in the next budget. Please do that, to make sure we can continue, we can finish the job connecting regional, rural and remote areas to the internet. And when the NBN isn't available, I want to see better satellite and mobile broadband solutions, because my constituents are tired of hearing that because they live in a regional area they must accept that the NBN may not make it to them. And not good enough. We must make sure that if it is to be satellite, it's absolutely top class. This issue is so important for the development of the regions. We can't let them fall behind because the cities because we can't connect. It's absolutely critical to my electorate because it's a disaster-prone area. I know I'm not the only one in that situation. The Black Summer bushfires, the Black Saturday bushfires 10 years before that, the flooding, catastrophic storms and so on just absolutely underscore the critical nature. This is not just for a Netflix connection, even though I'm the first to want one of those too. People rely on phone and internet services to keep themselves and their families safe. They just do. I know the Minister knows that. Throughout my career, as a nurse, as a midwife, as an academic researcher and as an MP, I've learnt that you don't stop until the job's done, and that's my message to the government. The reforms in this bill will benefit consumers across Australia, but there is much more to be done before we can say with confidence that all Australians have access to reliable, affordable, fast internet.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Casey.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I want to commend the member for Indi for her contribution, the member for Riverina, and the member for Indi is correct. There's a common theme that's coming through with the speakers, and that is regional and rural Australia. And I'll add another element to that, peri-urban region as well. And the member for Riverina and Indi both paid compliment to the Minister, and I want to do that as well. I mean, communications is such an important issue that should be bipartisan, and it's a credit to her that she's here today to listen. I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in my community today, but I know I've been inundated with calls and messages. I know it will mean a lot to them that you're here to listen, because this is such an important issue, particularly in emergencies. And I'll give the Minister and her team fair warning. There's some correspondence coming following up from our correspondence earlier this year looking at eligibility around the Dandenong Ranges. I know you acknowledged, and I appreciate you acknowledged the concerns about resilience in peri-urban areas and having to look at the boundaries of the funding schemes and how we can resolve these. So we'll be looking forward to working with your office on how we can find funding for peri-urban areas. It's a continual frustration for my community, the Dandenong Ranges, the Upper Yarra, the Yarra Valley. It's 40-50 minute drive with no traffic from the CBD, but anyone that visits knows it's not suburban. It's beautiful nature, it's farmland, it's agriculture, it's mountains, it's challenging terrain. And there's a lot of beautiful trees, Deputy Speaker. There's a lot of tall trees, hundreds of feet. And the problem is when there's a storm, lots of trees fall down and we lose power. And when we lose power in our community, we lose communications. And there's about 70,000 properties that are without power today across my community. There's many community groups, there's many schools, including my children's own school, and I just want to pay tribute quickly to all those teachers that I know are teaching or doing the best they can today without any power at the school, and thank you to them and all the community that are rallying around to make sure we can get through. Hopefully it's only a couple of days, but the next week or so without power and communications. But I also need to acknowledge, for many people today, it's actually going to be a tough day. It's going to bring back some trauma from the June storms of 2021. Anyone that lived in my area, my community, was impacted by those storms. We were 3 weeks without power ourselves, but that was nothing. Many people in the Dandenongs were 3 months without power, and 2.5 years on, many haven't rebuilt yet. So I just want to acknowledge for those people today that might be okay physically and their house might be okay. There will be a lot of trauma also in our community. It's important we rally around and support each other. And I want to share a couple of stories of my experience on that day, but also from the CFA with the Minister in the room, so she can understand my passion and my community's passion for why we need strong, resilient emergency services. On that day, we were blocked in, my wife and I, in our house for about 6 to 8 hours. Trees had come down at the front of our road, so we couldn't leave our house. And the CFA came and checked on us within a couple of hours, and we were really fortunate. But the scary part, Deputy Speaker, about that experience is we've got quite a few trees around our house, and no trees fell down, but we had on the house, and so we were safe. But we actually had that conversation because while phones are very convenient, when there's no internet, there's no phone reception, they're the most useless thing in the world. And we don't have, like many houses, a landline. So we had that conversation in that moment of, if a tree had fallen on our house and I'd been hurt, or my wife or our children, we literally had no ability to get out and to get help. The cars couldn't leave the driveway, and it's a moment where you realise how vulnerable you are in those times. Bushfires are another significant threat in our community. I lived through Black Saturday, the 2019 bushfires live with us all. And and the CFA have said this, we were fortunate in a way that the storms were a static event. And so it was a significant event, but it wasn't a dynamic, fast-moving event. So communications was a significant issue, but it wasn't as significant if it was a bushfire and we were trying to get updates on the spot. And that's what we're talking about. And just to highlight the challenges from an emergency services perspective, I spoke to Sarah, who's a friend of mine who I've known for many years, from the Sassafras Ferny Creek CFA. During the storms, the only way they could communicate and was literally, she had her mobile phone placed on one little spot in their station, one little spot, and she was trying to text people, and if she moved it even a centimetre, she said it felt like it would drop in and out. And that was how the CFA across the Dandenong Ranges were trying to communicate with each other in the middle of the night, with trees continuing to fall down. The Emerald SES had one of their vehicles crushed on that night, and luckily, by luck, the two SES members weren't in the vehicle. But again, if they were and they'd been hit, they had no ability to call for support or for help during that storm. And so I do want to pay tribute to all our volunteers, the CFA and the SES. They don't get paid for this. They are volunteers that have left their families in the middle of the night in pitch dark to go and help other people, to put their lives on the line. And what we need to do as governments, and this is not a criticism of the government, this is bipartisan because it is a challenging situation, I acknowledge that, the terrain, the topography, it's not about politics, it's about working in a bipartisan way to make them as safe as possible, so when they risk their lives to protect our community, they've got the communications they need to call for backup. And as I said, I understand it's challenging, but the frustration my community has, and it's happened previously, it's not about this government, it's things like the mobile network hardening program, when we get the community not being able to get funding and they're told that they're a metropolitan area, it just furthers that frustration for us. So I am really grateful. I didn't expect the Minister to be here, but I'm glad I could share those stories on behalf of my community, and looking forward to continuing to work with you on that. We've got people that are lucky, but it's also about that resilience and the reality that NBN and communications is an essential service in emergencies, but also day-to-day in our community. So Belinda Young from Mums of the Hills has been an amazing advocate for this, because you need to understand, if you live in the Dandenong Ranges or if you live in the Upper Yarra or the Yarra Valley, your neighbour is not 15, 20 metres away. They are kilometres away. Even if they're next door, you've got a couple of k's up your driveway and you're a couple of k's around. You cannot just walk to your neighbours. So isolation, for mums in particular, and young mothers that are at home with their children, is a significant issue, and being able to communicate with their friends on their phones through Facebook and social media is so crucial. And I want to share how Mums of the Hills started, because it's an important story, but it highlights how important communications are. And Belinda founded Mums of the Hills because she'd moved to the area and her husband was at work. She was at home with their young son and she fell off a ladder and hurt herself. And she was lucky that it wasn't significant. But it was in that moment that she realised she didn't actually know anyone in the area that could support her. She literally couldn't walk, even if she was able to, but she wasn't able to walk to the neighbours because of living in the Dandenongs. And that's how she founded Mums of the Hills, as a Facebook group to support mums as they go through challenges and to build that connection. And this is the only way, as I said, Deputy Speaker, these mums initially can communicate. And I didn't stay at home, but I know my wife is very often reminding me that it's even if you can duck out with a couple of young kids, it's not 5 minutes. There is a process that you need to go to. So this network of friends through Facebook is really important. They got through COVID as a community. They're continuing to support each other through financial challenges, other challenges. But I know Belinda has spent a lot of time advocating for communications as an essential service, and I want to thank her for her advocacy and continue to support that and say that we need to do more in this regard. But it's not just the Dandenongs, it's also our farming communities in the Yarra Valley that have challenges. Last year, as an example, there was a satellite that went down and tractors across the country stopped working. Farmers weren't able to farm, and it's a great example of, again, the advantages of the digital economy, the advantages, the productivity gains, the efficiencies we can get from technology and digital. But if we're so reliant on it, we've got no redundancy in our system, it creates risk. And that's why we need to continue to make sure that in our regional farming communities, NBN, again, isn't a nice to have. As the member for Indi said, we don't want strong NBN so we can watch Netflix. We need a strong connection to internet so we can farm, so we can work from home if we need to. If the kids are home, they can access their schooling, as we saw through COVID. It's a way of life. I've been able to just live, I don't want to use the term normal, but it's be able to have those basic abilities to communicate. Again, if something happens, your neighbour's not 2 minutes away. They're a long way away. And I think we need to look at, and I spoke about this in my first speech, understanding the new technologies that are available, and satellite communications is moving at a rapid pace. It provides opportunities that can alleviate some of the geographical and topography challenges that we face. And I asked the Minister, I understand we're moving down an NBN path and that is important, but I believe we need to look at whether it's NBN or private partnerships, how we can maximise satellites to really solve some of these challenges in hard-to-reach places, in areas like mine where there's valleys, where there's mountains, where geography plays a huge part in the challenges we face, and satellite has that opportunity as well. So we talk a lot about communications, and for many people it is about better internet access for Netflix and for just living their lives, working from home in the suburbs and middle suburbs, and that's important. I don't denigrate that. But is there a reason that a lot of regional, rural and peri-urban members have spoken today is because this is one of the biggest challenges our communities face. So I do finish again by thanking the Minister for being here to listen. I look forward to continuing to work with her on some bipartisan solutions for my community and many other communities as well.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for New England.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, I'd like to also acknowledge the member for Greenway, the Minister, for being here. I appreciate that, and it shows a professionalism that should be respected by so many others in the job they do. So that's very encouraging, and it's all important because this is all part of our nation. For me, one of the biggest fights I had was when I first arrived in Parliament as a senator in 2009. and 5, and it was the sale of the remainder of the shares in Telstra, and it was a big issue which we had to, on behalf of those representing regional constituencies, to try and bargain as best we could to get the best deal possible. I'll be frank, at the end, amongst a whole range of the network guarantee, the customer service guarantee, all these things that we got, including $2 billion for things that we hadn't thought of at the time, was important because we had to try and get regional people to a position, and I held out my vote until we dealt with these things. At the start, we got nothing. Then apparently they were offered us $600 million, came through, and then I was being pressured by my leader at the time to say yes. Then we got $1 billion, and I still held out because I was in negotiations with other people telling me the sort of funds we needed to actually to do what we had to do. Now, in the end, there was, amongst all the guarantees we got, there was an extra $2 billion. And I have to be frank, once we lost the election, my colleagues in the coalition voted with the Labor Party to get rid of the money. So, a huge disappointment because it showed a lack of understanding of what exactly we were doing in regional areas. Madam Speaker, I want to take you briefly to a conversation I just had in the other chamber. The member for Hotham and I had an exchange because I was saying that how important it was to look after people in regional areas, especially with things such as roads, because we don't have bus services, and because we don't have bus services, I said the mother is unable to have a job because she spends the whole time trying to manage getting kids to school and back to school. And the interjection was, well, it's 2024, don't you think guys should do it as well? Well, yeah, they could, but they've got to organise someone in the house to go out and have a job. And unfortunately, so often, it's just the reality. It falls on the mother to pick up this responsibility. It just does. Now, what mothers want to do in regional areas is work from home. Work from home. Then they can have a job. But they can't work from home if they don't have any telecommunications or if it's unreliable. The employer just says, look, I'm sorry, it's just, it's unreliable. We can't do this. We can't have you as part of our office environment because we just can't rely on your internet connection. Therefore, that person is relegated to home duties. And they don't want to. They want to have a professional life like everybody else. And I know with my wife being a journalist, she absolutely tunes me up about how things are going in telecommunications. I know there's quite a number of people on the other side probably think it's a very good reason not to give her telecommunications. But let's go through some of the things that are important. I'd like to thank Elon Musk because before Elon Musk turned up with Starlink, it was really dodgy having any satellite because they say go satellite, they just drop out. And things can happen in the house like another kid turns on another program and then your telecommunications drops out and this is just not viable. You probably note, colleagues, when I do mornings with sunrise that I've got this beautiful view because they say, isn't that lovely? It's on the top of a hill. There's a very good reason for that. It's the only place I get reception. And that's why we go up the hill. We go up the hill to get the reception. Sometimes we can get it from halfway up, sometimes we go to the top, because we've got to have good reception for that link, and even that link's at 4G, not 5G. One of our big worries is we've gone from CDMA to 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G, Minister, is they're going to turn off 3G. And for a lot of us, that's all we get. The number one issue is if something goes wrong, you can make a phone call. We have 14 kilometres of dirt road in the other areas, and even simple things. Just the other day, the road was out. A tree fell across it, and a mother no one turns up with a chainsaw. But imagine if someone had a heart attack. Imagine if something gone wrong. You can't get out. So we're worried when they turn off 3G, Minister, that we're going to have 0G. 5G will come on board, but it's a much better service for a lot smaller range. And we've got to hold these people's feet to the fire and say, you don't turn off 3G till you can prove to the government that you've got 5G. So we're going to go to areas that have got 3G, and if they don't get 5G, we're going to say, well, you can't turn off 3G until they've got a service. They've got to have a service. The number one issue for our security, for anybody who's sick, see, if you're sick and you don't have a phone, you've got to move into town, and there's a whole range of other expenses. You've got to rent a house, you might want to go into aged care, but they've got to rent a house, and these things all come off telecommunications. We're finding out lately as they go up, we're going higher and higher up the hill as apparently the broadband gets better. We're going higher up the hill to try and get that connection. Just basic things, basic standard of living things. If something goes wrong, we have to call the police. In country, a lot of people own firearms, right? Something goes wrong, you have to call the police. You can't just, if there's a problem arrives at the house, you can't drive out because the problem's just out your front door. And you've got to have that phone service to say, I've got a problem here and I need help in a big hurry. Someone, if they're home alone and they have a stroke, a heart attack, something goes wrong, appendicitis, they've got to have a phone service. Otherwise, they're in trouble. And we do have instances, tragically, where people die because they couldn't call anybody. If you just work phone services on profitability, you're going to have areas that have a great standard of living, and you're going to have other areas that are poor people made poorer because they just don't have any service at all. So hold their foot to the fire. I want to give you an example of other things. Here's another example, Minister. A lot of these mobile phone towers are connected by electricity. You've just seen what happens when the electricity goes out. When they go out, all your mobile phone towers go out. We've said so often, we had a meeting about this in a place called Nowndock, which almost filled the hall. So these things are really important in local areas. They said, on our farms, if a pump goes out or if the house goes out, we have what I call a Murphy switch on a generator, and the generator kicks in, bang, kicks in straight away, and the power's restored. Because we understand at times power goes out, and we rig things up so we can deal with it. But for some unknown reason, mobile phone towers don't have it. And it'd be something to say to them, look, we want you to give us an surety that if the power goes out, the mobile phone tower keeps going. Because they trip, and then they can have a whole 3 or 4 go out, and you've got no mobile reception. You just say, mate, we'll help you out if you want. We can rig up the generator, make sure it's there, and as soon as the power goes out, it'll turn the switch, and on it'll go. It's something we can do, and sometimes you get almost a sense of belligerence, or the too hard basket, can't quite get to there, and you say, you're not listening to us. You're not listening to what we say. We need that tower going. Minister, I understand the parochialism about mobile phone tower coverage, but I think it's really important that within your department you say, get back to me. We need a basic service. I want you to tell me on the map where that basic service isn't. Now, that basic service might also be in the peri-urban areas of a major capital, where they say, we just don't have mobile phone service. I've found that, because we all know when we drive along, once you go over this ridge, no phone service, and then you're back into it here. Find out where those areas are and then say, OK, now let's have the program of how we do this, and hold them to the fire and say, if you're going to get cash from the government, I want something back in return about your guarantee and exactly what you're going to do for us. Another thing, Minister, is they're very parochial. You'll find them, and I'm sure you understand, about roaming. They don't like roaming. Because they like monopolies, roaming out. I think there has to be some discussion about, look, even if it's not roaming on Globo, we've got to have roaming in situ in certain areas of critical need. Now, you can charge them a premium for using your tower, but you've got to allow them to use your tower. Because if someone goes from the city, they're on Optus, they roll their car at, where I live, Danglemar, if they're on Optus, forget it, there's no service. Yet you go to other places, if you roll your car and you're not on Telstra, no service. And we've got to make sure that we say, no, in situ in certain areas, in critical areas, part of this deal is you have to allow roaming in that area, because it's a safety thing. A telecommunication at work does not work just in Sydney. It is effective when it works across the nation. We're also, just to add on to other things, work from home, which so many women want to do. That is the reality in regional areas. Women, once a kid goes to school, you're working at home or you're not working. And on Zoom meetings, team meetings, all these type of meetings, they've got to have the bandwidth to be able to stay on that meeting and be taken seriously. Otherwise, people don't take you seriously. In our areas also, we've got farm machinery. Farm machinery these days is completely different to farm machinery. It works in 100% connection to places such as Detroit. If you're on John Deere, your tractor is talking to Detroit. Why? Because if you've got a bearing or a heating something going wrong with it, you've got to turn the engine off straight away. Because otherwise your problem goes from a $3,000 problem to a $50,000 problem. and the message comes back to you, switch off. Obviously not a person ringing you, but you get a message, immediately turn off. That's how farming works now. That's the level it's at. And for it to be at that level, you've got to have the telecommunication capacity for you to buy that infrastructure from Detroit, and soon it'll be from India, from all over the places, because that's how it works these days. That's how you've got to be able to do that. We have also for us, like I live in the hills, occupational health and safety. If people are going out, they've got to be contactable, because if something goes wrong, they come off a horse, they're working with machinery and something goes wrong, they roll a car, roll a tractor, roll a truck. They've got to be contactable, and we've got to know that something's gone wrong with that. And if they haven't got telecommunications, that is a big problem. And rather than saying, "Oh, we just can't do it," we've got to think around the corners. Okay, how can we deliver this to that area? Because we have microcells, and that's worked. We've worked with microcells because the big mobile phone towers can be hellishly expensive, but you can get microcells that at least partly deal with the issue in certain areas. I'm thinking of Upper Horton. I'm thinking out the back of Scone, Moonan's Flats. These areas we've got microcells in there, so at least the people in the village have got the capacity to have, and the elderly people have got the capacity and the security they feel from dealing with it. Other things are coming our way. Artificial intelligence is coming our way, and this is going to absolutely exponentially change the relevance of telecommunications. It's going to go through the roof. And therefore it's going to exponentially change the disconnection of people who can't be on board with it. If you don't have connection with it, you're going to be just light years away. We've also got to acknowledge with the artificial intelligence coming forward that a lot of people today who have jobs, especially clerical jobs, just like factories knocked out weavers, this will knock out clerical jobs. They'll go. Your computer will be able to do it better than you, and are vastly cheaper. And so we're going to need telecommunication systems to get these people who will be out of work back into work. You're going to see some massive changes. For instance, here's a classic one, tangential to this. Why do we need office blocks if we don't have office workers in them? We're starting to get, I'm an accountant, you're starting to get impairments on those assets right now. People are starting to ask the question, why do we need that? Because these people, they'll have to find a different job. And we can be Luddites and think, oh, well, we'll just smash the telecommunication system, we'll smash AI. You won't. And so we've got to have a telecommunication system that reaches over and says, this is coming our way. How do we make sure all these people are still employed? How do they work? What are their jobs in this new era of artificial intelligence? What is artificial intelligence going to do? What is the jobs that our kids, grandkids and you are going to do when this event arises? And it's arriving right now. So I thank you very much for that. The final thing I think we need to check in on is adversaries, especially countries. We know that people are hacking into our systems. They could create such disruption, like the Communist People's Republic of China and the Iranians and the Russians. If they take down our system, if we don't have proper security there, they can have half the battle won before they do anything else. The first event of a conflict will not be you hearing bombs dropping out of the sky. It'll be in the cyber world, where all of a sudden the only thing that's going to drop out is your telecommunications system, taking out the banking system, taking out everything with it, creating absolute chaos on the ground before you do it. So we have to make sure our telecommunications system is bulletproof against that. Unless you got the investment, I know we invested $10 billion and you're investing in it, we're all doing it, because on national security there should be very little differentiation between parties. We all go down the same toilet if it comes unstuck. So I ask you, make sure we have a strong line of sight there. Go to the National Security Committee and make sure and insist that they prove to you that they've got it all under control.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I appreciate all the contributions that have been made today that have been very insightful and instructive, which I will continue to follow up with individual members. There are a number of initiatives on foot that a number of members actually did raise on specific issues. I won't go into detail on all of them, but I'm grateful to the member for New England for highlighting the issue of roaming, and just to highlight that temporary disaster roaming was recently found by the ACCC to be technically feasible. and it's something that we are pursuing now within the department. I welcome the cooperation that's been shown by the mobile carriers to date, but I can assure the member that this is a very high priority within the portfolio, and completely agree with him on the need to have that being realised. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Telecommunications Legislation Amendment Enhancing Consumer Safeguards and Other Matters Bill 2023 will deliver improved safeguards for Australian consumers when they access broadband and voice services. It does this through a number of measures. First, the bill refines and improves the Statutory Infrastructure Provider or SIP regime. Key measures that will benefit consumers include introducing the power for the Minister to require SIPs to pay compensation where they do not meet a standard or rule, allowing the telecommunications industry ombudsman to resolve complaints about SIP connections, and providing clearer rules for SIPs when they exit areas or when premises in their areas begin to be occupied. Second, the bill provides powers for the Australian Communications and Media Authority to issue remedial notices to developers who do not install functional fibre-ready facilities such as pit and pipe in developments. Third, the bill will allow the ACMA to identify carriers and carriage service providers in public reports on their performance. This will improve transparency and accountability. Fourth, the bill will allow universal service providers to be determined in relation to specific areas of Australia. This could, for example, be helpful if Norfolk Island is fully integrated into the Australian telecommunications regulatory framework. Finally, the bill makes some technical amendments to legislation, including to clarify the powers of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to issue infringement notices and to clarify the maximum penalties that should apply for breaches of carrier separation rules, and also the anti-avoidance measures relating to the regional broadband scheme. I again thank all members for their participation in the debate on this legislation that will deliver better outcomes for people in Australia accessing essential telecommunications services.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, and I call the clerk.